Awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, I think we've got enough folks here to get started. So welcome, everyone. My name is Matthew Caponegro. I'm a member of the TestRail team, and I'm really excited to welcome you to today's webinar. The star of the show here today is Mike Maliska. So I'll pass you off to him in just a second, but want to give a quick intro and then one housekeeping note, an experiment that we're going to try with today's webinar. So Mike Maliska is, he'll tell you more about himself, but he's been a long-time TestRail customer. Today, he's actually going to be talking more about the automation suites and program that he and his team have developed at PrismHR. I think it's going to be a really insightful conversation about how you can approach test automation, some of the different strategies that you can use to begin developing your test automation practice, some different key pointers that he and his team have developed, as well as it'll be really fun to see. Mike's actually going to give us a somewhat interactive demo of the setup that he's got there. So one of the things that we want to do today, because we're really focusing on this it's this walkthrough of this example, it's less like thought leadership stuff and really tactical here. We would love to invite you, if you have a question, you are more than welcome to type that question out and put it in the Q&A panel of the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to drop that question in there while the webinar is happening, and then we can read it out at the end if we've got time for the Q&A, and we can discuss. We're also going to invite folks, if you want to ask your question via audio, we're going to invite folks at the end of the presentation to raise their hand. If you could put the question in the chat panel and just say, hey, I would love to ask this question in person if we have time, and then put your question there, then I can unmute you and we can have a little bit more actual conversation, which will be fun. It's not something that we typically do in TestRail webinars, but we really are excited to try it out and see how that works. So without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Mike Maliska, pun not intended, and we'll chat more at the end of the webinar.
All right, thank you, everybody. So I'm excited to be here. So just the housekeeping issues, Matt did go ahead and cover those, so I think we're okay there. Just want to talk about a little bit on some of the things that this will cover, will not cover. I'm going to make some assumptions here. I'm going to make the assumption that most people on this call have some basic familiarity with TestRail, that you don't have to be a power user of TestRail, but you go in, you create projects, you create test cases, or at least that you have some concept of test case management. I also going to make some assumptions that you have some conceptual understanding of DevOps, CI/CD, pipelines, and maybe even some branching strategy. Again, I'm going to say conceptual. I don't think anybody here is required to be doing those things, but I'm going to talk about them briefly. So, hopefully some people have at least have heard these terms and are interested in them. And I'm also going to clearly focus on how testing fits into the entire cycle, or the entire process, life cycle of testing, not just TestRail and test case management, but how it fits into all of that, and of course TestRail being a great tool to do this. So those are really what I'm going to cover during this. Towards the end, I'm going to start. Well, first I'm going to start off with some conceptual ideas. Talk about the things that the problems we tried to solve, and then I'm going to go into a live demo. And when I say, I'm going to put demo in quotes, because what I'm going to demo is actually what we use every day in our company. This is, I'm going to run some tests. I'm going to perform some tasks that exactly as both our test automation and manual testers would use. So it's not vaporware, it's not slideware. You get to see exactly what we do and how it can fit in. All right. All right, so there I am. Senior QA manager and automation architect. I've been doing this for more years than I care to admit, but a little over 20 years. There is a link to my LinkedIn profile and my email. I am going to, in case I forget to say it at the end, I welcome any email requests to continue the conversation past this. I'm very passionate about test automation, very passionate about testing, specifically automation. I love automation in all its forms, which I'll get into. So feel free to contact me with any questions, even that we don't cover here. So the agenda that I'm really hoping to cover here is, I'm going to talk about the product release lifecycle, right? Because in the end, that's what our businesses do. We are testing. Well, I shouldn't say everyone that uses TestRail, but the vast majority of us are using testing software, especially if you're interested in automation. So I want to figure out how exactly that fits into the life cycle during the automation. I want to kind of define what automation means to me and what it sometimes means to others. Once we do that, we're going to kind of talk about how we can automate those segments, what segments of that life cycle actually can be automated. Talk a little bit about identifying team responsibilities. Automation really spreads across teams, which we'll talk about in a moment. We'll talk about identifying which automation tools to use. There are lots of tools to use. I will talk about the tools that we use, but again, I don't think that we'll talk about how we use them, and I think there are lots of good tools out there. So I don't want to necessarily say what we do is always right for everybody. Again, I'll give a live demo where you get to see exactly what we do. Yeah, I will be honest, it's not perfect, right? This is something that is always under development. I think when you get to this level, you're always looking for improvements, but I think you'll like what you see. And then we'll talk about how to grow your automation. And again, organically, we'll talk about that. Then we'll open it up to Q&A. So the software release lifecycle. I know that there are more steps here than what I'm presenting. But I'm not trying to get down into every little individual step. I think this is a very good overarching representation of the life cycle. We have sprint planning. The developers develop. We have development, and hopefully our developers are unit testing. And I just heard all of you groan because your developers aren't unit testing, but that's okay. We build the product. That build usually should require some level of unit testing. And each one of these, as we go along, you can see here, we go from sprint planning to the next, to development, to build, and we're going along. If there's a problem with unit testing, we kick it back to development. If there's a problem with the unit testing and the build, it goes back a step. And that's what the red arrows are indicating, that if the tests start failing at any one of these, we go backwards. And if the tests pass, we go forward. So it certainly really is truly a cycle. You'll see a term here called feature freeze and code freeze. I think most of you are probably familiar with the term code freeze. That's where we ask development to freeze the code so that we can build an artifact, so that we can push that artifact to a staging environment so we can run our tests. Feature freeze is something that some teams aren't familiar with. Feature freeze really is kind of a neat concept where we ask people to, where we ask development and really product management to stop adding features for this given release. Because sometimes development or product management will keep adding features right up to the last moment. So we actually have something where we call feature freeze, where we say, please stop adding new features, even though we know the code isn't done. When we do that, we here at Prism deploy the software to a QA environment, and we start our testing. And I'm going to talk about the types of testing in a moment. Then we have the familiar code freeze, which is we ask the developers to stop adding code so we're saying whatever features are done coding is all we're going to do. And then we only concentrate on bug fixes. And then there's this term, what we call wave day, but really that is production deployment. Some of you may be building an artifact which your customers install, therefore it's not really a deployment. If you're using a SaaS model, software as a service, you may be hosting cloud systems where you push your software to your cloud environments. We call that wave day. And you can see here that beyond unit testing, we also have what we call sanity testing, UAT testing, and regression testing. In our world, sanity testing is no more than 15 minutes worth of tests. That tells us that the product was deployed to this environment in a good enough state that it warrants us to spend more time on it. If the sanity tests fail, there is no point in wasting QA cycles going further. We ask that both development and maybe our ops team, our operations team, to go and look at that environment and redeploy the software, possibly fix the build. So that's what sanity tests are. It's a quick test to make sure that that deployment is in a good enough state to actually start testing. UAT testing, user acceptance testing, this is where we're actually testing the new features which were put, or even bug fixes, which are part of this sprint or part of this release. And then of course we have regression testing. And in our world, regression testing is all the tests that we have in our arsenal that we think we need to run against this system to make sure that we didn't break something that was previously released. And we do that at 2 different deployment areas. So let me define automation. Automation describes a wide range of technologies that reduce human intervention in processes. Human intervention is reduced by predetermining decisions, criteria, sub-process relationships, and related actions, and embodying those permutations in code. That is true automation. A lot of times we think of automation as test automation because we're viewing it through that lens, but automation really means what steps can we do to have a computer do it for us so that we don't have to have a human actually go do those steps. When we apply that definition to that life cycle, which I just showed, we get a different picture. You can see the blue is not automatable and the yellow is automatable. And there's some of you may be debating some of this, but sprint planning usually is not automatable. We're not to the point yet where we have a conversation, right? The sprint planning, we're having a conversation. How long do we really think it's going to do to develop this? We're not to the point where our AI can actually develop the software for us, right? So those are things that are not automatable. Unit testing certainly is automatable. Whether we can perform it or not, it is automatable. Our build process is automatable. Unit testing during the build process, certainly automatable. Deploying that code and running those sanity tests, certainly automatable. User acceptance tests. I have this listed as not automatable. Technically, it is. However, you want to have real eyes on it. You want to have someone really spend their time looking at this. This is a brand new feature, or this is a bug that has to be fixed. You want real eyes on this. And then of course our regression tests are automatable. And then the next two columns are just repeats of that. And I'm going to talk about why, the more automation we can put into that sanity test and regression test, the more time your QA folks have time to actually spend on UAT testing. So let's talk about automation types. And I kind of talked about this a little bit, but test automation, unit testing, test automation, functional and regression testing, test automation frameworks. The frameworks that you choose technically are automation. You can deploy that framework, you have to run that framework. Those are all things that can be considered automation. The build process is automation. The deployment is automation. Configuring the system after it's been deployed. I'm sure a lot of you have spent time, the ops team says, okay, the new artifact has been deployed to our staging environment. We're ready for testing. The first thing QA does is go in and set up some configuration and or some data seeding. Let's make sure that the correct data is in there. We're connected to the correct database. The information that we require for our testing is set up in that database. All of those things can be automated and so forth. So let's highlight some of the responsibilities of this. And again, I will say some of these lines are blurred. Unit testing, that is usually a responsibility of the development team. The unit tests are usually built into the code itself. They're usually run when they're compiling. So unit tests are usually the responsibility of the development team. Test automation, I'm going to say functional and regression tests, that's usually the responsibility of the QA team. QA team, they know these tests front and back. They know what they want to test. If you're going to automate those tests, it's usually the QA team that's responsible for doing the automation of those tests. The test automation framework itself that you use, that can be the QA team, but sometimes it's a tools group. There's a group out there that has picked this particular tool or that particular tool to run your automation test cases. That team, again, some teams have tools groups, some don't. So again, that one's one of those blurry ones. Is that really the QA team? Is that really the ops team? Is that the tools group team? For us, we have a tools group team. We're lucky enough to have that team. Build automation, the automation that actually builds the product and builds our artifact. That's, in our case, it's the ops team. Sometimes it's the development team. The deployment of that artifact, again, it's our ops team. The configuration of that, sometimes it's the ops team, sometimes it's the automation team. Usually it's the automation team, or I should have said the QA team, because the QA team knows how they want it to be configured specifically for their tests. And data seeding, same thing. Sometimes it's the ops team. Sometimes you need the ops team to restore a database or preload the database with certain information. Sometimes it's the QA team that literally manually goes in there after the deployment and makes sure that specific data is in there for that particular test, especially if you're working on a bug that you need to verify. So as you can see, when someone says, oh, let's do automation, well, what are we really focused on here? And I am gonna focus on mainly things that are around the QA teams that can perform, but I'm gonna show how it all works together and how it all fits together. So when you apply those teams to those buckets, that same life cycle that we talked about, you can see, well, the development, the Q unit testing still falls under development. The purple, that usually again is ops. So we want to build some automation that builds our builds, deploys our software, gets it ready, does some configuration. That's going to be our ops team. But you can see the majority of this is QA. These are the buckets, the responsibility of QA. Whether, again, it's manual or automation. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the tools and the infrastructure. And I will say, I apologize if I'm going a little fast, but I would think that it's going to be important to see all of this working and open it up to questions, because I think that's going to be more important than just seeing some of these slides. So tools and infrastructure that we use. We use Jenkins for our workflow engine. It's part of our CI/CD pipeline, both for our deployments of code as well as our deployments for automation testing. We also use Jenkins for manual kickoffs. Somebody can actually go into Jenkins and manually kick these things off. It's not fully CI/CD. Well, we do have CI/CD, but we can also do these things manually, because there are times where somebody wants to use their own particular branch, or they want to run something very specific. Other people may be using Bamboo. There's a variety of tools that can be used. We happen to use Jenkins. We also use GitHub for our source control. We keep all our infrastructure scripts in GitHub, and we keep our testing scripts in GitHub. Again, that's for version control. And again, there's a variety of different kinds of source control out there. You can use any of them, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, especially if your development team is already familiar with one of these services. We use Python both as our test automation framework and as our infrastructure deployment. So our infrastructure deployment, what I mean by that is that's what we do to set up our machines. That's what we do to do some of our data seeding, our configuration steps. As you'll see, we ask the users a series of questions. Based off of those questions, we'll perform some logic in the background to know exactly what kind of automation the user would like to see and do and perform. We use Python for that. Does not have to be Python. Just it's a very easy language, so we use it. Our test automation framework itself, we have a homegrown automation framework. It's very versatile for us. It gave us a little bit more control. Does not mean that you have to use a homegrown automation framework. There's lots of tools out there, and a lot of them work very well. And I'll get into that a little bit about that. It also depends on the technical skills of the people doing your automation. Some require more code, some require less code. So obviously we use TestRail as our test case management system. We'll talk about this is pivotal to how our automation works. We use TestRail as I'm going to say our source of truth, right? So when someone says, I would like to go run regression tests, well, what are regression tests? Where are those regression tests? That's all defined for us in TestRail. When someone says, what are the results of those regression tests? We go to TestRail. So that's kind of the linchpin that holds all of this together for us. We do some of our own reporting. We have our managers, and our management team likes to see a variety of different reports. So we use an Apache web server to report some of these things. We store results in raw format in a backend Postgres database. And we also use Django with JavaScript for customized dashboards. I will say those last things that I just talked about, those are very mature things that once your automation is up and running, you'll naturally grow towards those. And again, I'm going to hit on this, that you don't need all of these things to start your automation. I think that's probably critical to understand. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let me go ahead and give a live demo. So this is our Jenkins server. As you can see, I'm gonna click on a tab here called PrismHR, because we are PrismHR. We have other products. We have ePay product, we have a client space product, we have a marketplace product. I'm gonna use Prism for this demo. I think it's very flexible. But as you can see, we have a variety of Jenkins jobs. Again, a Jenkins job is just, I'd like to go kick something off. I'd like to make something happen. So in this first case, I'm gonna do 3 different demos, but the first demo that I'd like to show is what we call build and run. And as you can see, this is TAF, stands for Test Automation Framework, PrismHR, because that's the product, TestRail build and run. And what we mean by that is we're going to, this probably happens, you guys have seen this happen. I'm gonna go down to one of our products, which happens to be Prism. And I want to run some sanity tests, or I want to run some sanity and smoke tests. So I can come in here and I'm gonna, add a test plan. And this plan is my demo test plan. We require a milestone, not everybody does. And I'm gonna add that plan. And now to that plan, I wanna add a run. And that's a date. Now I'm gonna say, well, we're gonna test this against this particular server. And I wanna go ahead and select my test cases. And I'm gonna say, I want my automated test cases, and I'd like my sanity and smoke test cases. And I'm going to say, set those up. And I'm gonna say, okay, save. Okay. Now, TestRail, that was pretty simple, pretty easy. I think, again, most people on here are familiar with the steps that I just took. I'm setting up a test plan. I want to add my test cases. This is something that our QA folks do every single day, day in, day out. They also, I may need to do this same thing. I go to this plan, I may need to run this on our server DB51, 52, 53, 54. I may need to not only run this from my Prism product, but we have other products, benefit enrollment, onboarding. I may need to do that several times. I will tell you that on our deployment day, we run this against 16 servers. We need the results of each one of those servers. We run it across 6 different products. So somebody would have to come in and duplicate these steps over and over and over. So you just saw what we did. What this job is going to do for us is ask the user some questions and do what we just did. So I'm going to go ahead and hit build and run. And I'm going to say build with parameters. That is just Jenkins' way of saying, please ask me the questions to go kick this off. Okay. We have a thing called a profile, which I'll get into later, but these are all the different environments that we run our automation against, our tests against, not even just our automation. We run testing against these environments. I'm going to go ahead and pick DB50, and I'm going to give it a test plan name, and Maliska other demo. And you can see here, what products do I have? So these project names right here match the different projects I have here in TestRail. So I'm going to pick that Prism product that we talked about. Which tests do I want? Sanity, smoke, regression. I'm going to go ahead and pick sanity tests. Or I'm going to pick sanity and smoke. And this is where I talked about some conceptions about branching. I'm going to pick what branch I want. Some people have one branch and one branch only. And what I mean by branching is you may be testing the product and you're testing on a production server that's been out there that has your most current build out there. Or you may be testing what's under active development. And that's what this is doing for us. This is saying, what am I testing? Because your tests may be slightly different. You may have new features. Features may have changed. So I'm going to pick current release. And I'm going to go ahead, and there's some questions here, but do I want Chrome or do I want Edge? I am going to pick Chrome and send an email to myself. And you can see we have some Slack integration as well. And I'm going to kind of really keep it simple, and I'm going to hit build with parameters. This is where our automation infrastructure comes into place. I mentioned that we keep our automation infrastructure in Git. What this is actually doing behind the scenes is going to our Git repository, bringing down our scripts, saying, hey, based off of that information, I know some information about our TestRail. I'd like to go, I know it's Prism. It's using the TestRail APIs behind the scenes to ask TestRail to please go to the PrismHR project and give me a list of all the sanity and smoke tests. And I'm going to go into this right here. I'm going to go into test runs. And you can see this is the one I manually created. And this is the one that was created just now. And you can see it was created by TAF, right? It was created by our test automation framework, where this one was created by me. So if I go into that right now, there's my DB50 because I selected DB50. And if I click on that, you can see here are all my sanity and smoke tests added for me. It handles the whole creation. Now, where this becomes very powerful is if I did the same thing again, what you can see here is I could have easily said, give me 51 or 52 and continue to do this. Or I could have said, give me 52 and I want to do benefits, employee portal, onboarding, platform API, PrismHR. And what I would have had, what would happen is I'd get this same plan in every single one of my projects. And it would have added the sanity and smoke tests for that project. So again, what I'm really trying to drive home here is that up until now, this is very simple automation. We're just saying, please go create that plan for me so that so we don't have to do this manually. This then will actually kick off our automation framework. And again, our automation framework is using Jenkins. And you can see here, we have a job that is kicking off our automation. And I'm going to circle back and get more involved in the automation. So I'm going to let this run a little bit. And I'm going to talk about another thing that our QA does. So that was one of these jobs. This is a very simple job. This was test, build, and run. Go build a plan, add some tests, run those tests, update TestRail, and give me the results. That's a very simple one. That's usually one-off kind of thing. Now, most of us, either you have a small automation suite or you have no automation, or even if you have a large automation suite, the reality is that when you're testing, especially a big release, you need a combination of both manual testing and automated testing. So we have these other ones where we simply say build. Again, this is MR. That's a maintenance release for us. Build QR. That is our quarterly releases. All of you are going to have kind of your own system about this, but the idea is really quick that I can say, I would like to go build one of my MR test plans. And I'm going to, again, hit build and build with parameters. And you can see here project, what is being released is the part of this release. And I'm going to pick Prism again, just to pick on that team. And here are the next 2 maintenance releases we have coming up, right? We have one in October and we have one in December. We have these 2. This has to mean something to you, right? Your release names aren't going to look like this. Your release name is going to mean something to you. It could be version 5, version 5.2. Your releases could look like this. This is a naming convention we came up with. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to build that plan. Event type. Again, this has to mean something to you. We put different tests, and we test on different projects, and we test on different environments based off of whether it's a feature freeze or a code freeze. This may not be relevant to you, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and hit feature freeze. And I'm going to say, which environment do I want to deploy this to? And I'm going to say MR1. And what you'll see, yep, good. And I'm going to hit build again. And what this is going to do for me, I again come into TestRail. We give this a moment. Oh, and by the way, you can see here this Maliska demo. I have 23% passing here. It's because my automation is running. The automation is already running in the background. So here, MR2, that's the plan I picked. It's a feature freeze. Again, you're all going to have your own version of what this builds, your own naming convention. But if I go into this, and you can see here, MR1, MR1 QAT, it's because we have different reasons for this. And if you click on here, you can see all the sanity, smoke, and regression tests were automatically added. So that just saved the QA people a lot of time. They can then come in here, and this is often what really happens, is they come in here and they edit this plan, and now they can come in here and say, you know what, I want to go add manual regression tests. And add the selected. Okay. And there you can see it just jumped up. And now when I go in here, I have not only my automated, but my manual tests. So a lot of times the QA team will go and use automation to build the plan. And then they will go and add manual tests. And then they will run the automation later, meaning, so now I could come back here and I could say, run my MR test plan and build with parameters. And I pick my Prism and my release and my feature freeze. And this will automatically read out of this the test cases which are automated, send them to our automated system, and start running those tests and update TestRail with the results. So I think the important thing that I'm trying to drive home here is that when we talk about automation, there's automation and then there's automation, right? There is our test automation, which is actually running our tests. And then there is some simple automation that just says, I don't want to have to build this plan by hand. I don't want to have to add these tests by hand. You can start off with little pieces of automation to make your life easier to start. And on the reverse, you could say, well, I'm going to build my plans by hand for right now, but I would like automation to do nothing more than update these plans in real time. I would love that when my automation runs, it just updates these test plans in real time. And just so you can see this too, when we come into here, it even takes a screenshot of what was happening when that test failed. So those are two different ways our teams are using this. The last thing that I'm gonna basically say, and it's not really a demo so much as everything that we did here, even the clicking of this, a lot of people would say, hey, that's great, that's automation. Someone can come in here and click this, answer a few questions, and everything runs. You can even take it a step further. These things can be called via APIs, and we do this now, that when our ops team deploys what we call a hot fix, right? This is nothing more than a bug fix live in production, that when that thing is pushed, we can, at that point, actually ops calls this. No one even has to come in here and click these buttons. It will automatically, and I'm going to show you that live. You go to Prism. You can see here, hotfix PD 12806. Hotfix here. Hotfix here. These were all kicked off by our automation. Literally, there was no intervention. The developer checked into a branch. The developer asked the ops team to build that artifact. The ops team built the artifact. At the end of building that artifact, they call automation, which will automatically come in here and run these. And they wanted to test this, as you can see, against this environment, this environment, this environment. It gets complex, right? But what I wanted to really show here is not, A, don't expect this day one, right? This is built over time, but B, it is all possible. When you hear people in some of these seminars talk about, yes, you can have CI/CD, and yes, you can have automation, you can have the, yes, you actually can, right? You guys saw this, right? I'm not showing you anything our QA group doesn't go in and do right now. All right. So stay focused and grow organically. I think this is really important. Don't boil the ocean. If you try to duplicate everything I just showed you, you won't know where to start and you won't see incremental growth, right? The point is you start with the very simple things. Take a look at saying, I think one of the questions that was in here that someone had asked was about, where do you start? Or, what kind of tests do you want to start testing and so forth. Believe it or not, you want to start with the things that are stable. You want to show that your teams can rely on automation. If your automation is always testing fragile stuff, then the tests will be very fragile, and you won't know whether the problem is the test or whether the problem is what you're testing. So I like to start automation with, let's take the login. Let's take screens that haven't been touched in a long time and build some solid testing. It's okay to start in the middle. You guys saw that we have this entire life cycle. Pick the pain point and start there. Certainly it can be manual step, run some automation, manual step. And then you start working to the left and working to the right. It's okay to start in the middle. You start with, honestly, the easiest stuff first. Build your support infrastructure. And what I mean by that is start with like that Jenkins that I showed you. Meaning if you get familiar with Jenkins, you understand how Jenkins works and you can build a job. And again, it doesn't have to be Jenkins. It could be a batch file. It could be something easy that just says, I'd like to go do something and run some steps. But as long as you know that you're not debugging the infrastructure that's trying to run that automation, then that's better, right? So build out your infrastructure. Know that your infrastructure works and runs your stuff. And that way, if the stuff fails, you're looking at the failures of that, not looking at your infrastructure. Because then every time it fails, you're trying to debug 3 different things and you're not sure where to start. Reuse tools as much as possible. As you saw, we're using Jenkins in a variety of ways. Our development team uses Jenkins. If your development team uses Bamboo, use Bamboo. If you have other teams that use tools, use those existing tools in other ways. And then, of course, ask other teams for help. I think that's very critical. Ask the ops team, ask the development team. Hey, how do I do this? Some of the best QA engineers I know some of the best automation engineers I know were QA engineers that were really, in the end, just sick of having to do the same steps over and over and over again. They're working on a development team. They ask the development team, hey, how do I do this? Most engineers are really would love to help. And I would say, if you're working with a development team, play on their egos. Ask them, ham up to them. They will help you. They really will. Okay, so I'm just going to reiterate this. I talked about this at the beginning. Automation versus automation, and honestly, the phrase that you hate to hear, which is, can't we just automate that? Because again, a lot of times people don't understand the difference between automation, test automation, meaning my tests run in an automated fashion, versus CI/CD. The developer just checks in some code and everything just runs out, and on the other end, I get a test results. Yeah, that's all automated, but it requires a lot of teamwork from a lot of different teams and a lot of buy-in, right? If you start small, like I said, start in the middle, your team can work on these things, and then you can expand out. And you don't need everybody's buy-in to make little incremental improvements to your team. So when you are automating, and really this is whether this is going to be test automation or any kind of automation, I think these are the important things to ask. Are the steps clearly defined? A lot of times you'll hear say, oh, we're going to work on a new feature. Let's automate the test for that. If you're in the middle of development and you don't know how the feature is going to work, whether the user is going to click on this workflow or that workflow, it's not good for automation. You automate clearly defined steps. Are the steps repeatable, right? And that goes right along with clearly defined steps. Can you perform those steps the same way over and over and over? Yes, great candidate for automation. The answer to that is no. It's probably not a good candidate for automation. Has the business logic been worked out? How do you run it? When do you run it? And what I mean by that is, we had that thing called feature freeze and code freeze. If your team doesn't have a feature freeze or code freeze, or it's not quite clear, well, sometimes we run it this way and sometimes we run it that way, and sometimes if somebody asks for it to do it this way and it happens to be a Tuesday after a full moon, we add those tests. Those things happen. If the business logic really isn't worked out, your automation is kind of doomed to fail. But if you have business logic worked out, that's great. Then that's a good something to automate. Are the steps being done manually now, and by whom, right? Again, the whole point of the automation is to remove those manual steps, to free up that manual person to do more user acceptance tests. There are plenty of things during our life cycle, our software test life cycle, that require manual eyes. They do. And the less this user is doing steps over and over and over again, the more they can actually spend on the quality of the product. And then, of course, once it's been automated, who owns it, right? You may have a team that works on the tests, they fix the test, they have it working, it's working great, it works great for one release, 2 releases. If that test fails, who owns that? Should QA then go manually verify that that test failed? Who owns the maintenance? Who owns the upkeep? Who owns the results of these things? You really want to make sure that you're in a position to know how this happens. I've seen automation gets spun up and it works great for 3 months, and we like, oh, that stuff's automated, but we're never going to look at it again, and you move on, and then all of a sudden it falls down. You have to be prepared to answer that question: who will own maintenance and own the automation going forward? There is a cost to that. That's just truly what it is. So I'm going to say breakout topics here, and what I mean is I'm going to talk about some of the things I didn't cover, but I really think these are all topics that really I could spend another 2 to 3 hours on each one of these things, right? Customizing TestRail to fit your workflow. You don't need to change your workflow to fit TestRail, right? We've been able to do a lot with TestRail. TestRail is very flexible. It fits our workflow. What's nice is we can change TestRail and use the APIs in different ways to fit our workflow, not have to say, well, let's just work differently because TestRail doesn't allow that. It's one of the reasons why we use TestRail as a test case management system. So how you set up TestRail to be ready for this, that could be a topic all on its own. Test automation framework. I didn't really get into the test automation framework. I didn't show you guys the code that runs our tests. That again could be an entire 2 hours talking about going into our repository, showing you the framework, how we do our testing, what we use to test, whether it's API testing, back-end testing, front-end testing. Those are all the different things. How you integrate your test automation framework to TestRail. How did I get Jenkins when you click that button? How did Jenkins actually know which project to go build that plan in? How did it add the run name? How did it, the logic that it did to go and find sanity and smoke tests? Those are all questions that, again, we could spend hours on. Our CI/CD pipelines, that's another good one. And we really didn't even get into metrics and reporting, the different ways. So again, I don't want to make it sound like we're not considering these things. These are all great topics that I think that we need to start having the conversation about. Questions and answers. Well, hopefully I have answers. So Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Mike, that was great. We've got lots of good questions here. We probably won't have time to get to all of them, but what I'd like to do to start, let me pull out here. Okay, so Serene had a good question about how you actually link the test automation to test cases and TestRail. Serene, I'm gonna unmute the mic and let you ask that in just a second here. Shoot, Serene, I'm not finding you in the list. That's my apologies.
Well,
Mike, could you go ahead while I'm looking
absolutely.
for? Yeah, sorry.
Sure. So no worries. So we use Python, and we use a module in Python called PyTest to do our test automation. Python allows you to add what they call a marker. In the Java world, it's called a tag. And when you say, hey, excuse me, you say, hey, go run my tests, you can tell PyTest, here's a list of the tests I'd like to run. Well, what we do is in Python, we literally add the quote marker to the line inside the function. So to the test itself, there's just says C13456, and that number corresponds to the TestRail test case ID. And what our automation actually does is when I say go run Prism sanity tests, we're calling the API, and I'm going to show you this. We call the API, we log into Prism, we call the API to go to the test case management here, and we filter, and we say execution method automated, and we have a thing called priority, and we say sanity tests, we say okay, and it gives us a list of all of the sanity tests over here on the right, and I'm going to say something like this. How do I get this to title? So here are all my tests. These are automated. So what we do is in our automation, we literally link this test case ID number to our automation. And we use APIs to say, if the user requested sanity tests, give me a list of those ID numbers, which correspond to sanity, and then tell Python to go run those ID numbers. That's how we do it. Sounds a lot, it's a little bit more complicated than I just said, but in short, that's how we're doing it. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of this, we are a heavy TestRail API user. We are using the TestRail APIs behind the scenes to do everything we just did. I hope
That's
that answers the
awesome.
question.
Yeah.
Serene, did that help, or do you have any follow-up questions to that?
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. Actually, I am working with TestRail and I want to know, I have already the setup of automated tests in Cucumber, and I wanted to know those ID in TestRail, are they tags in feature files or?
So when we call TestRail, we call the TestRail API, and it returns us a list of all the test cases. We iterate through the test cases looking for whatever meets our criteria. It's an automated test, meaning that the execution method field is equal to automated. The test is equal to sanity. That gives us a list of this case numbers. I'm somewhat familiar with Cucumber, but not familiar enough to know how you run it. So when we write all of these numbers to a text file, and then we pass that text file to Python. It says, here are the tests that you want. I'm assuming Cucumber has something similar where you can say, hey, Cucumber, please go run these tests. Let me show you real quick. GitHub and Prism. And you can see for our tests, apologize real quick. I suppose I could have pulled this up on my system. Here's my login test. That's the TestRail marker that I talked about. So in Cucumber, there's probably somewhere that says this test is this. And you can put this. You may have to test it. You may have to pass it the test name. There's different ways depending on how Cucumber works, but that's how we do it. We use the API and we use the filters in the API to give us a list of all of these numbers that match the criteria we want. And we then pass that to Python, and Python says, oh, you said this number, I didn't say that, but it said something else. Does that, I hope, answer your question? Now,
Yeah.
There's a reverse to this, right? Meaning that you can also add this case number into your test and say, well, look, what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to tell Jenkins to tell my test automation what to run. I'm going to run my automation and give it a run number. And if I see that case in here, then I will update TestRail, right? So you can do it in the reverse way. You can say, as I run my automation, this test case matches this test case, or this function inside Cucumber matches this test case in TestRail. Please go update the results as passing. And you use an API for that. We do the same thing when we come into here, and as I showed you these, when I come into here, we update these by using the API.
That's awesome, Mike. I think just given the time, we should probably wrap up, because I know folks have other meetings they have to go to, and I'm sure you do as well. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for attending. We will send the link to the recording. Mike, it might also be fun if we hop on like a 30-minute Zoom call at some point later this week, and I could just ask you a couple of the questions, and we could turn it into maybe a little blog or link in the community forums. So I'll follow up with you about that because there were some awesome questions coming in here. But thanks again. This is a fantastic presentation. So helpful to get to see how y'all have actually solved some of these automation problems in the real world here. As you mentioned, you've got your contact information here on the screen, right?
Yes, yes.
Awesome.
So please, anyone reach out.
And we'll send that information with the follow-up email that's got the link to the recording as well. So Mike, thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.